Welcome to the Liberating River, where spiritual freedom meets soul aligned wealth. I'm your guide, Wanda F. Nesbitt. Let's break free, build boldly, and live fully. Welcome back, family, to the Liberating River, where faith, freedom, and alignment flow unapologetically. I am your river guide, Wanda F. Nesbitt. And today we are diving further into one of the concepts that we previously talked about in episode 2. We're going to dive into a truth that has shaped so many of our lives in ways we didn't even realize. What I'm talking about is fear-based obedience, and not just in our spiritual walk, but in the way we handle money, how we make decisions, and unfortunately, how we live out our purpose. As I mentioned in episode 2, fear infects our whole life. It infects it. Fear doesn't just keep us bound in church pews or in religious systems, right? Fear also keeps us bound financially, emotionally, and even generationally. If fear is the reason you obey, it might also be the reason you give, the reason you don't invest, or the reason you settle for less than what God actually designed you for. But hear me today. God never asked you to obey out of fear. God calls us to walk in obedience out of love. And when your obedience shifts from fear to love, your whole life begins to open up. It opens up spiritually, emotionally, and yes, financially. What we're going to do in this episode is break it down into 5 parts. Part 1, understanding fear-based obedience. Let's start by defining it, right? Fear-based obedience is when your actions, your choices, your yeses to God are rooted in fear of punishment instead of freedom of love. It's doing the right thing for the wrong reason. So, it might sound like this. If I don't tithe, I'll be cursed. Or if I don't say yes to everything the church asks, God will be angry. Or if I rest, I'm being lazy and unfaithful. But healthy obedience looks different. Healthy obedience is rooted in love. That's it. Love. It says, I trust God's heart for me, so I'll align with his direction. Scripturally, in 1 John 4:18, it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Now, think about this with money. How often have you given because you were scared of what would happen if you didn't? That's fear-based obedience. God is not sitting in heaven, I promise you. He is not sitting in heaven with a calculator and a thunderbolt waiting to strike you down if you miss a tithe. That's not what's going to happen. That's not who God is. And if that is true, then the same effect should happen when you do not render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Think about it. I want you to reflect on this question. Am I obeying God's direction because I love and trust God, or because I'm terrified of what happens if I don't? Really sit with that question. Take in a deep breath and truly contemplate that. How does that resonate with you? What is your truth? Part 2, how fear-based obedience shows up. Now, fear-based obedience shows up in sneaky ways. And I'm going to share personally how it can truly affect your life. So spiritually, it might look like this, right? I was a person who overcommitted a lot. I was on the usher board. I was a drummer. I was on the choir. I was one of those individuals who would help deliver home items to people who were in need. I cleaned up the sanctuary. I folded bulletins. I was that person. I have never just been a member of a church. I always had to do something. Always. Partly, if I'm fully honest, partly is because I was raised in the church. As far back as I can think, I was raised in the church, and that is what I saw down through the years. And then the other part is partly because I am a PK. If you don't know what that means, it stands for a preacher's kid. But for me, both of my parents were ordained preachers and for a long time co-pastors. My mother is still alive. My father died in the height of COVID in May of 2020. So, yes, I was completely in the church. And for me, it was a lot of fear-based obedience that naturally grew inside of me. um, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking the more I do, the more I'll stay out of trouble, the more God sees me as I am a devoted person. And, God will see my activity and will love me. Later on in my adult years, I continued that because that became now a habit. But I did come to this place where I realized I needed to do stuff truly from a pure heart, not out of fear. So before then, I was just being, the good daughter. And if I'm honest, I was honestly resenting it and resenting the walk with God deep down inside. If I'm honest, right? Because I didn't want to do all that stuff. And even in adulthood, I didn't want to do all that stuff. I was drained. But ironically, I could not stop because I was afraid it meant I was not truly a follower or a believer. And to be honest, everybody else was doing it. So I thought it was what I was supposed to do. So it must have been right. That's what I thought. But that's absolutely wrong. That's not what spirituality is. That's not what doing things for God is at all. Financially, it was a domino in my life. It affected every aspect of my life. So I had that foundation spiritually. And then from that, financially, it just trickled onto that space as well. I was always giving out of fear. I misunderstood the purpose of tithing. It has nothing to do with salvation. If you know, you know. That's all I'm going to say. It is not insurance, but rather it is supposed to be a portion of the funds God has given unto you, unto me, to steward so we can have something to be charitable with and help someone else in need. That's what it's supposed to be for. That's what a tithe is. Even if we look at just investing and saving, let's be honest. How many of us refuse to invest or save because fear whispers in our ear, it's too risky. You'll lose everything. I know it's not just me. I know it's not just me. But what I
also know it's not true. That's fear. And I was completely guilty of thinking that for so many years. And you know what? That fear opened the door to being frugal. I'm going to say air quotes to that, frugal. Because there's frugal and then there's frugal, AKA hoarding money. And that's really what I was doing. That was hoarding money is basically the fear of thinking that you'll never have enough. And that's again fear. Fear building on fear and on fear and on fear. Let me ask you this real quick, right? How has fear shaped the way you see money? Either as a chain you're trapped by or as something you're constantly afraid to lose. Really think about that. Let that sink in. Because I had to do that for myself. That's how I broke free. Part 3, the cost of fear-based obedience. Here's the thing, fear always comes with a cost. Period, point blank. Fear always comes with a cost. Spiritually, it exhausts you. You end up burnt out, bitter, and detached. Burnt out, bitter, and detached. Then you start questioning your relationship with God, right? And in that relationship with God, you start looking at God as, okay, we are in a contract versus a covenant. We might have to talk about that in another episode because those are two different things. A contract and a covenant are two different things. Emotionally, it takes a toll on you. Fear-based obedience keeps you anxious and always second-guessing yourself all the time. And of course, financially, going right back to the finance because finance is a part of living, right? The cost is even higher. You will miss opportunities because you're afraid to take risks. You will stay in toxic jobs because of fear. And what fear? What fear? The fear that you won't survive outside of that paycheck. The fear that you won't make it. And ironically, you pass down a scarcity mindset to those in your environment, in your household environment, in your family environment, in your community environment, teaching by your actions. And what you're teaching is fear of lack instead of faith in provision. So let's stop right now. Let's cleanse the air. Let's start to take back what is actually ours. Say this with me. Speak this over your own life. I am not bound by fear. I am led by love. My giving, my saving, my investing, it flows from trust in divine provision. I am not bound by fear. I am led by love. My giving, my saving, my investing flow from trust in divine provision. Say it until you feel the shift inside of you. Because you have to motivate yourself. There is nothing wrong with investing and saving. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do that. And if you need more information about investing and saving, click the link in the description for further details.
Stay tuned. To be continued. Coming next week. Thanks for flowing with us on the Liberating River. Subscribe, share, and come back next week for more wisdom, wealth, and alignment. Stay free, stay grounded, stay bold.